A strange silence settled over the planet the night the sky tore open. People were still going about their routines, fixing late dinners, finishing homework, scrolling through their feeds when a shimmering rift appeared above Earth like a wound in the stars. For a moment, no one knew what to make of it. It was too still, too precise, too intentional. Then a voice rolled across the world, echoed through every device, and pulsed straight into the air itself. It was cold, metallic, and certain of its power. It called itself the Galactic Empire, and it declared humanity's time was over. The voice warned us to surrender. It warned us not to resist. It warned us, in a tone dripping with superiority, that we were nothing but an unruly, primitive species that needed to be brought into order. But what the Empire never expected, what no conquering force in the galaxy could have predicted, was humanity's response. Not fear, not panic, not trembling obedience. Instead, the first reply that blasted across the global broadcast was a burst of laughter from some random person in a tiny apartment. Real, ridiculous, unfiltered laughter, and then more people joined in. At first it was nervous, then it turned into genuine amusement, the kind that shakes the chest and makes no sense in the face of danger. Within minutes, millions of humans were laughing. Not because they didn't understand the threat, but because they did and refused to bow to it. That single moment of defiant laughter sent a shockwave through the Empire's pristine order. It was the moment the galaxy learned that humans don't break the way the Empire expected. Of course, beneath the humor, the tension was real. Governments scrambled to understand what this galactic empire truly was. Scientists tried to decode the strange energy patterns around the rift. Military leaders whispered about weapons they hoped they would never need to use. Every day people argued whether this was the start of an invasion or just an elaborate hoax. Some treated it like a world-ending prophecy. Others joked about alien customer service finally calling back. Still, hidden underneath all that noise was a growing sense of unity, a quiet belief that humanity had faced impossible odds before and would do it again. No matter what came through that shimmering fracture in the sky, people felt something fierce rising in them. Then came the second transmission. The Empire's voice sounded less patient this time, as if it was trying to understand why the species it intended to conquer didn't follow the script. It demanded loyalty, it demanded silence, it demanded submission. But this time, humanity did not just laugh, humanity answered. A spokesperson from the Space Research Coalition stepped forward, standing on a rooftop beneath the glowing rift, speaking not with fancy words or heroic speeches, but with a calm, human sort of stubbornness. They said Earth did not take kindly to threats. They said humans might not be the strongest or the most advanced, but they had something the Empire seemed to lack, the will to stand up even when hope seemed impossible. Their voice was steady, natural, and almost gentle as they told the Empire something simple, that humanity wasn't surrendering, not today. Not ever. That answer sparked something across the planet. People who had felt powerless suddenly found courage rising like a forgotten instinct. Engineers volunteered to help build defenses. Astronomers stayed awake for days studying the rift. Kids asked their parents if they could join whatever team was going to talk back to the aliens again. Even those who had been terrified at first started to feel a strange, buzzing excitement. It wasn't that humans wanted a fight. They just refused to be told who they were by some distant empire that didn't even know them. And somewhere deep in the rift, something shifted, like an unseen force leaning closer, listening. But not all was laughter and bravery. There were shadows moving inside that glowing tear, shapes that didn't match any known technology. There were whispers on secure channels about energy signatures far beyond anything Earth had ever detected. And late one night, just as the world was beginning to settle into its strange new normal, every satellite pointed at the rift caught the same image of fleet emerging, dark and silent, spreading across the stars like a storm. Yet instead of panic, instead of surrender, the world held its breath. Because now the question was no longer whether the Empire would strike. The real question, the one everyone felt but no one dared to say, was whether humanity's defiant laughter had awakened something unexpected, something powerful, something the Empire was not ready for. And as the first of those shadowed ships drifted toward the edge of the rift, Earth waited united, stubborn, and unafraid, wondering what the Empire would do next, and what humanity would become in the moment that followed. The shadowed ships hovered just beyond the rift, their outlines sharp against the glowing tier in space. No one could tell if they were watching, preparing, or simply waiting for some cosmic signal. All over Earth, people stayed awake through the night, sitting beside windows or clustered around screens, listening for any change in the hum that now pulsed faintly through the air. It wasn't loud, not enough to scare anyone on its own, but it carried a feeling like something massive shifting its weight on the other side of reality. Government agencies scrambled to gather information, but even the best instruments struggled to read the strange energy fields around the rift. Some experts insisted the ships were only scouts. Others argued they were war vessels built for intimidation. A few believed they weren't ships at all, but something entirely different, something older than the Empire itself. The uncertainty only tightened the tension. Every theory added a new layer to the mystery, and none of them made the situation less frightening. Yet, even in the middle of all this, humanity stayed strangely grounded. People still had to get up for work, still had to make breakfast, still had to catch buses and trains. Life didn't stop, even with an alien fleet floating above the world. And maybe that was part of what confused the Empire so much, the way humans adapted to the impossible, folding it into their daily routines as if the sky had always been cracked open. Behind closed doors, leaders from dozens of nations met in a secure underground facility. The spokesperson who had replied to the Empire stood at the center of the table, surrounded by holographic displays of the rift. They were calm, almost too calm, as they explained that Earth could not afford to be reactive. If the Empire truly intended to invade, humanity needed to understand its enemy. Not just their weapons or ships, but their motives and their weaknesses. The research coalition brought in specialists, linguists, astrophysicists, energy analysts, even cultural historians, anyone who might catch a detail others missed. As they dug deeper, they learned that the Empire's warning wasn't just a threat. It was part of a pattern. Old cosmic records hinted at civilizations across the galaxy that had vanished after similar warnings. No battles, no wreckage, no final messages, just silence. Entire worlds wiped clean, as if they had been erased from memory. This discovery spread through the team like ice water. If the Empire followed the same path here, Earth might not just be conquered, it might vanish entirely. Still, not everyone accepted the idea that humanity would face the same fate. Some argued that the Empire had hesitated. They had expected submission, and when they didn't get it, something shifted. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were reconsidering. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, the Empire wasn't sure how to handle a species that didn't collapse at the first sign of pressure. Meanwhile, regular citizens dealt with the unfolding crisis in their own ways. Some turned community centers into makeshift support hubs where people shared updates and comforted each other. Others camped on rooftops with binoculars, determined to be the first to see anything new. Artists painted murals of the rift, turning fear into expression. Musicians wrote songs about the laughter that started everything. Humanity responded not just with fear or strength, but with creativity, stubbornness, and an odd sort of joy that came from refusing to give in. But beneath the surface, there were cracks. Some people whispered that humanity's defiance would only make things worse. Others believed the Empire would send a second warning, one far less patient. There were rumors of strange electromagnetic waves interfering with power grids, reports of brief blackouts near observatories, stories of people hearing faint voices whispering through radios at night, speaking in a language no one could identify. Even animals seemed to sense something, gathering in unusual patterns or watching the sky with uneasy attention. Satellite images showed the alien ships shifting formation, not advancing, not retreating, just rearranging. The pattern repeated every few hours, like a silent ritual or an encoded message. Each rearrangement created a new shape, new angles, new shadows that scientists tried desperately to decipher. Nothing matched known tactics or formations. The more humanity studied the ships, the more questions surfaced. What were they waiting for? Why send a warning if they weren't ready to act? And why did their movements feel almost like they weren't watching humanity, but something else? One evening, just as the global network prepared for another status update, the rift flickered. Only for a split second, but long enough for every sensor on Earth to spike. The glow dimmed, then flared brighter than before, casting long shadows across rooftops and mountains. People stepped outside, shielding their eyes, staring at the sky with a mix of fear and awe. The ships had stopped moving. They aligned themselves in a perfect arc around the rift, as if preparing for something far beyond a simple invasion. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through walls and floors, making the ground feel unsteady. It wasn't an attack, not yet. But it was a signal, a message from the Empire that whatever came next would change everything. Humanity stood together, staring upward, hearts pounding, breaths held, not knowing if the light in the rift meant arrival, destruction, or something far stranger. And then, as the glow sharpened into a blinding point, the sky trembled, leaving the world suspended in a moment that felt like the edge of an unfolding fate. The blinding point of light at the center of the rift grew sharper, spinning slowly like a needle trying to stitch two universes together. People all over Earth felt the air thicken, as if gravity itself was leaning toward the sky. Even those who had forced themselves to stay calm earlier now sensed something was different. This was no simple show of force. The Galactic Empire was preparing for a move that didn't fit any human expectation. Yet still, no attack came, no commands, no demands. Just that bright, silent whirl of light pressing into everyone's nerves. Inside the underground facility, the research coalition scrambled to decode the strange pulses coming off the rift. Charts flickered, waves spiked and dipped. None of it matched the Empire's earlier broadcasts. The spokesperson, who had become the calm thread holding the team together, stood behind the analysts, watching the data unfold like a warning whisper. Someone suggested that the Empire might be opening a portal large enough for their main fleet. Someone else argued it wasn't a portal at all, but a scanning beam, something designed to read Earth down to its core. Another claimed it might be neither, that maybe the Empire wasn't alone and something else was pushing through. No one spoke after that last theory, not because it sounded impossible, but because it didn't. On the surface, the world was reacting in its own messy human way. News streams buzzed with theories. Some people insisted the ships were malfunctioning. Others thought the rift was unstable and the Empire was struggling to control it. A few groups painted signs and marched through city squares, demanding communication, demanding peace, demanding answers from both the Empire and Earth's leaders. But the loudest emotion wasn't fear. It was curiosity, the kind that had always driven humanity to push too far, climb too high, and poke at things no sane species should touch. In one small town far from any major city, a school science club had turned their rooftop into a mini observatory. With their patched-together telescopes, they watched the rift every night. They noticed something no major agency had commented on. The ships, the shadowed vessels forming the arc, had small movements between their larger rearrangements, tiny shifts. Flickers of blue light running along their edges, pulses that looked almost like communication. Not toward Earth, but toward the spinning needle of light. They recorded the pulses and tried to share them with officials, but no one responded. There was too much noise, too many incoming reports, too many theories fighting for attention. So the students kept watching, convinced the ships weren't preparing to attack, they were preparing to receive something. Meanwhile, deep inside the facility, the coalition found themselves facing a second conflict, one not from the Empire, but from within. Some leaders argued it was time to attempt direct contact. Others demanded defensive strikes, convinced the longer Earth waited, the stronger the Empire's advantage would grow. The spokesperson tried to mediate, pointing out that humanity couldn't risk firing the first shot. Not when they didn't understand anything about the strange energy flickering inside the rift. A single mistake could turn Earth into another one of those silent, vanished worlds recorded in galactic history. But pressure was building. Fear made people unpredictable. A small faction within the military began pushing for a quiet authorization to test a long-range energy weapon aimed near-not at the rift. Just enough to send a message, they whispered. Just enough to show Earth wasn't helpless. The spokesperson pushed back, warning that even the hint of aggression could provoke something irreversible. Outside, ordinary people lived with a mix of dread and fascination. Families gathered around radios, hoping for updates. Street vendors sold cheap holographic toys shaped like the alien ships. Some teens snuck out at night just to sit on rooftops and stare at the rift, talking about what they would do if aliens actually landed. Humanity wasn't united in thought, but they were united in that strange electric focus on the sky. And then, in the middle of all this, an unexpected event stirred a new layer of confusion. A small satellite orbiting near the rift captured an image of something the size of a building drifting out from the center of the light. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't debris. It looked like a container, smooth, metallic, sealed with geometric lines that glowed faintly. It moved slowly, almost gently, drifting toward Earth like a gift or a warning. Scientists panicked. World leaders demanded answers. Conspiracy channels exploded, but the Empire said nothing. Their massive ships remained silent and still, watching. Humanity had no idea whether the object was dangerous, but it was on a slow collision course with Earth. Interceptors were launched. Tracking systems locked onto it. The object didn't react. It didn't accelerate or dodge. It simply drifted, peaceful and terrifying all at once. Some believed it was a message. Others thought it was a test. A few insisted it was a trap. But what unsettled everyone most was that the Empire made no move to intervene. They didn't warn. They didn't threaten. They didn't demand Earth stay away from the object. They just waited. And as the object edged closer to the atmosphere, glowing softly like a falling star, humanity braced, caught between fear, curiosity, and a growing sense that the real danger wasn't the object at all, but whatever might follow if humanity chose wrong. The drifting object glowed brighter as it neared Earth, its metallic surface catching sunlight and reflecting it in sharp flashes that streaked across the sky like warnings. People everywhere stopped what they were doing to watch it. Traffic slowed, conversations halted. In classrooms, students pressed their faces to the windows. In offices, workers gathered around screens showing live updates. Even animals paused, ears twitching before turning their gaze upward. The world felt frozen, waiting for the next moment, one that could change everything. Interceptors formed a tight formation around the object, matching its slow descent. They didn't fire, but their presence made it clear that humanity was ready to act if needed. The spokesperson from the coalition watched the live feed from the underground facility, hands tight around the edge of the console. Their voice had been steady through every briefing, but now even they couldn't hide the tremor in their breathing. The object had no propulsion, no visible openings, no weapons, yet something about its simple approach felt heavier than any threat the Empire had made. The scientists monitoring the object discovered something even stranger. The glowing lines on its surface pulsed in rhythms that matched the silent signals passing between the Empire's ships. It wasn't just drifting, it was communicating, or listening, or waiting for something to react. This realization sent a chill through the room. If the object was part of the Empire's strategy, its purpose was still a mystery. But if it belonged to something else entirely, that meant the Empire was watching not just humanity, but the object itself. And the arc of ships surrounding the rift was starting to look less like a blockade and more like a defensive formation. A quiet, uneasy theory began spreading among the researchers. What if the Empire wasn't here to invade? What if they came because something else was coming through the rift and humanity had laughed at the wrong target? Outside the facility, tension rippled through the world. Some people cheered as the interceptors got closer to the object, calling it courage. Others begged for caution, afraid that any interference might trigger a disaster. A group of amateur radio enthusiasts who had been trying to decode the static around the rift suddenly heard a new pattern, a steady, low-frequency tone that didn't match any previous Empire transmission. They sent recordings to the coalition, hoping someone would understand it. Inside the facility, analysts worked around the clock. They filtered the tone, enhanced it, layered it over old data. When they finally managed to isolate it, the sound wasn't mechanical at all. It was too organic, too fluid. Not a message, exactly, but something that felt like a presence. And it was coming from inside the rift behind the Empire's ships, not from them. On the ground, the science club students who had been tracking the ships noticed that the tiny pulses running along the vessels were becoming frantic. The arc tightened. The ships aligned perfectly, forming a pattern that wasn't symmetrical, but purposeful, like a lock bracing for impact. They sent another alert to the authorities, begging someone to pay attention. A massive silhouette shifted behind the glowing curtain of light, larger than any of the Empire's ships. Its outline flickered, impossible to focus on, like trying to stare at something that existed in a different layer of reality. The Empire ships reformed instantly, gathering in tight, precise lines around the rift. The second twist was clear now. The object wasn't the threat, it was the herald. And whatever it had awakened or warned was about to emerge. The object struck the ground in the remote region with a flash of blue light, but no explosion. And for a moment the world was silent, not calm, not safe, just waiting. Because something vast was crossing into the galaxy, and whatever the Empire feared was finally arriving. The rift opened wide, stretching into a massive wound of light that spilled across the sky. Every beam pulsed like a heartbeat, each one stronger than the last. The Empire's ships moved into a tight wall, engines burning, shields flaring. Their formation wasn't an attack stance anymore, it was a barrier. Humanity watched from below as the galaxy's most feared conquerors looked more like desperate guardians holding back a tide no one understood. As they walked down the narrow road leading back toward town, Evelyn kept glancing over her shoulder. Habit, she told herself. For days she had lived with the fear of something creeping just behind her, and undoing that feeling wasn't going to be easy. But every time she looked, all she saw was the empty road stretching back toward the fading outline of the house, quiet and still under the soft glow of the evening sky. She hesitated, then nodded, for a while. There's still a lot that needs to be fixed. And I want to make sure the peace we fought for actually lasts, Lucas smiled. If you ever need help again, you know how to reach me? She watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner. The night air felt cool against her skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting everything settle inside her. She had survived fear, confusion, and uncertainty. She had uncovered the truth. She had faced shadows real and emotional and stepped out stronger on the other side. As she walked home, Evelyn felt a gentle sense of closure wrap around her. The past had finally loosened its grip, and the future, though still uncertain, no longer felt threatening. The story that had once kept her awake at night had reached its end. And now, with the town quiet and her heart steady, she was ready to begin again, carrying the lessons, strength, and clarity the journey had given her.